The blood that stained Grace Harper's hands wouldn't wash away, no matter how hard she scrubbed at the basin. Spring of 1878 had brought nothing but misery to Willits. Colorado first with the consumption that took her husband, and now with the fever that claimed her 6-month-old daughter in the dark hours before dawn. Her wedding ring glinted dully in the morning light as she finally gave up washing, letting the water drip from her raw fingers onto the wooden floor of her small homestead. Grace had arrived in Willits just 2 years prior, following Thomas Harper west with dreams of building something permanent. Now at 23, she stood utterly alone, her future as barren as the hills surrounding the mining town. She'd buried her baby girl that very morning in the small plot behind the cabin, marking the grave with a modest wooden cross she'd fashioned herself from pine scraps. It stood small and bare against the vast Colorado sky, seeming to shrink with each passing hour as Grace watched it from her window. "The ground's too hard to dig proper," Widow Jenkins had told her while helping with the burial. "Come spring thaw, you'll need something to protect it." But Grace couldn't think about such practical matters yet. The emptiness inside her chest left no room for planning. A knock at the door startled her from her grief. Wiping her hands on her apron, Grace smoothed her auburn hair and opened it to find Lucas Larson standing awkwardly on her porch, hat in hand. She knew him only by reputation, the quiet cowboy who'd arrived in Willits last autumn to work at the Blackwater Ranch outside town. Folks said he kept to himself, though he was fair in his dealings. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice low and respectful. "I heard about your loss. I'm mighty sorry." Grace nodded stiffly. "Thank you, Mr. Larson." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I noticed when riding past that your daughter's resting place might need some protection. From coyotes and such." The thought struck Grace like a physical blow. She hadn't considered that the shallow grave might be disturbed by animals. Her hand flew to her mouth. "I could build something," Lucas continued quickly. "A fence, small but sturdy. I've got the wood and tools. Wouldn't take but a day's work." Grace studied him, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of faded denim. Why would this man, practically a stranger, offer such kindness? "I couldn't pay you," she said finally. Lucas replaced his hat, shaking his head. "Wasn't asking for payment, madam. Just seemed the right thing to do." After a moment's consideration, Grace stepped back. "There's coffee if you'd like some before you start." Lucas declined politely and set to work immediately. From her window, Grace watched him unload planks of wood from his wagon, along with tools and a small bag of nails. His movements were efficient and practiced as he measured and cut the lumber. By midday, he had 4 sturdy posts set in the ground, forming a small rectangle around her daughter's grave. When the afternoon sun began its descent, Lucas had completed a simple but beautiful fence enclosure. The cross still looked small and bare, but now it stood protected, a tiny sanctuary in the vast wilderness. Lucas brushed the dirt from his hands and approached the house. "It's done, madam. I put a gate on the east side. Thought you might want to sit with her sometimes." His voice was gentle, understanding in a way that made Grace's carefully constructed composure begin to crumble. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Would you take some supper before you go? It's the least I can offer." Lucas appeared ready to decline again, but seemed to recognize something in her eyes, the desperate need not to be alone with her thoughts. He nodded. "That's kind of you, Mrs. Harper. I'd be grateful." That evening marked the beginning of a tentative friendship. Grace served a simple meal of beans and cornbread, and Lucas ate appreciatively, speaking little but listening intently when she found herself sharing memories of her daughter Emma's sweet smile, the way she'd laugh when Grace sang to her. "My wife and son died in childbirth 3 years back," Lucas said suddenly, staring into his coffee cup. In Missouri, before I came west. The confession hung in the air between them, a shared understanding of loss too deep for words. When Lucas left that night, promising to return in a few days to check on the fence, Grace felt something shift inside her, not healing exactly, but perhaps the first recognition that she might someday breathe without pain again. True to his word, Lucas returned 3 days later, ostensibly to ensure the fence was holding up. He brought fresh venison and offered to chop wood for her dwindling pile. Grace accepted his help, and they worked side by side in comfortable silence. The town's having a social on Saturday, Lucas mentioned as he prepared to leave. Might do you good to be among folks. Grace shook her head. I couldn't. Not yet. Lucas nodded, understanding. Another time, perhaps. The days lengthened as spring fully established itself across the Colorado Territory. Lucas continued his visits, never presumptuous, always with some practical reason, bringing supplies from town, fixing her leaking roof, teaching her how to shoot the revolver Thomas had left behind. A woman alone needs to protect herself, he insisted after she initially refused the lesson. Gradually, Grace began to look forward to his visits. She found herself listening for the sound of his horse approaching, taking more care with her appearance, and preparing special meals when she knew he was coming. The crushing weight of her grief, while never fully absent, began to ease enough that she could sometimes remember Emma with a smile instead of tears. By early summer, the wildflowers bloomed across the hills, and Lucas helped Grace plant a garden behind her cabin. As they worked the soil together, their hands occasionally brushed, sending unexpected warmth through Grace's body. You should come to town tomorrow, Lucas said, not looking up from the tomato seedlings he was carefully spacing. Supplies are running low, and I can't always make the trip for you. Grace hesitated, then nodded. I suppose it's time. The following day, Lucas arrived with his wagon to drive her to Willits. Grace wore her best dress, navy blue calico that Thomas had always admired, and pinned her hair up carefully. As they approached the main street, anxiety tightened her chest. They all know, she whispered. They'll look at me with pity. Lucas's hand briefly covered hers where it rested on the wagon seat. You've survived what would break most folks. There's no shame in grief, only strength in continuing on. His words steadied her, and Grace managed to complete her errands with her head held high, though the sympathetic glances from townspeople still stung. At the general store, she encountered Sarah Williams, whose son had been born just days before Emma. Grace, Sarah said, her healthy baby boy balanced on her hip. It's good to see you in town. Grace swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the infant. Your boy has grown so. An awkward silence fell between them until Lucas appeared at Grace's side, his presence solid and reassuring. Mrs. Williams, he greeted politely. Mrs. Harper and I were just finishing up. Good day to you. Outside, Grace drew a shaky breath. Thank you. Lucas merely nodded. Understanding her gratitude went beyond his small intervention. That evening, after returning to the homestead, Lucas built a fire in the yard and cooked the fresh trout he'd caught that morning. They ate under the stars, and for the first time since Emma's death, Grace found herself laughing at Lucas's dry observations about the townspeople. You have a beautiful laugh, he said, the firelight casting shadows across his face. Been hoping I'd hear it someday. Grace felt a flush rise to her cheeks. I didn't think I'd ever laugh again. Life has a way of continuing, even when we think it shouldn't, Lucas replied, his eyes holding hers across the flames. As summer progressed, Lucas's visits became more frequent. He never stayed past sundown, respectful of her reputation, but the hours they spent together grew longer and more comfortable. Grace found herself confiding in him about her life before Colorado, her childhood in Illinois, her dreams of becoming a teacher before meeting Thomas, her fears of facing the future alone. Lucas listened, occasionally sharing pieces of his own past his years driving cattle in Texas. The brother he'd lost in the war, his decision to seek solitude in the mountains after his wife's death. "I never expected to find peace here," he admitted one evening as they sat on her porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the valley. "Just a place to exist without the memories pressing so close." "And have you," Grace asked, "found peace?" Lucas turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I'm beginning to." The tender moment was interrupted by a flash of lightning followed by a deafening crack of thunder. Rain began to pour in sheets, and they rushed inside, laughing as they shook water from their clothes. In the warm glow of the oil lamp, with rain pounding on the roof, Grace suddenly became aware of how alone they were, how close Lucas stood. His gaze dropped briefly to her lips, and for a moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should get going before the creek rises too high," he said, though they both knew the statement was merely an excuse he'd crossed far worse to return to the ranch. "Be careful," Grace replied, disappointed yet relieved by his restraint. As Lucas opened the door to leave, he hesitated. "There's a harvest dance in town next month. Would you consider attending?" "With me?" Grace's heart quickened. "As friends?" Lucas met her eyes directly. "If that's what you wish. Or perhaps." He left the sentence unfinished, the possibility hanging between them. After a moment, Grace nodded. "I would like to attend with you, Lucas. Very much." His smile, rare and genuine, warmed her more than the fire. "I'll look forward to it, then. Good night, Grace." "Good night," she whispered as he disappeared into the rain. That night, as Grace prepared for bed, she found herself standing before her small mirror, really looking at her reflection for the first time in months. Grief had thinned her face, and dark circles still shadowed her eyes, but there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. She thought of Lucas, his quiet strength, his kindness, the way he never pushed but remained steadfastly present. With a start, she realized she was beginning to care for him in a way that went beyond friendship. The realization brought both guilt and a flutter of anticipation. Was it disloyal to Thomas and Emma to feel this way? Or was it, as Lucas had said, simply life continuing on? The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Grace threw herself into preparing for the harvest dance, altering her best dress and helping Lucas repair the wagon wheel that had broken during a delivery. Working side by side, their conversations flowed more easily, occasionally punctuated by moments of charged silence when their eyes would meet or their hands would touch. One afternoon, as they finished the repairs, Lucas wiped his brow and studied her thoughtfully. "You're looking more yourself these days," he observed. Grace paused. "I'm not sure who that is anymore. The woman I was before. She died with Thomas and Emma, I think." Lucas leaned against the wagon. "Maybe so, but the woman standing before me now has courage enough for 2 lifetimes." His words touched something deep within her. "You see too much good in me." "I see you exactly as you are, Grace Harper," Lucas replied, his voice low and certain. "And that's why He stopped abruptly, seeming to reconsider his words. "That's why I'm grateful for your friendship." Grace sensed there had been more he wanted to say, but she didn't press him. 2 days before the dance, disaster struck. A summer wildfire, sparked by lightning in the dry hills west of town, spread rapidly toward the outlying homesteads. Lucas arrived at Grace's cabin near dusk, his horse lathered from hard riding. "We need to go now," he urged, helping her gather a few precious belongings. "The fire's coming fast, and the wind's shifting this way." Grace worked quickly, her heart pounding as she packed a small bag with essentials and the few mementos of her family she couldn't bear to lose: Thomas's pocket watch, Emma's christening gown, the family Bible with their names inscribed inside. As she rushed to the door, her eyes fell on Emma's grave, visible through the window with its protective fence. "Lucas," she breathed, panic rising. "Emma, I can't leave her." Understanding crossed his face immediately. "The fire might not reach this far," he said, though they both knew it was a hollow reassurance. "But I promise you, whatever happens, I'll rebuild the fence, even better than before." There was no time for more words. They fled toward town, joining other families seeking refuge from the advancing flames. From the church steps, which stood on the highest point in Willits, Grace watched the orange glow on the horizon creeping closer to where her home and her daughter's final resting place stood vulnerable. Lucas remained by her side through the long night, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the distant blaze. By morning, the wind had mercifully shifted, and rain, a rare summer blessing, began to fall, dampening the fire's advance. When it was finally safe to return, 3 days later, Grace steeled herself for the worst. Several homesteads had been destroyed completely, and she had little hope hers had been spared. As Lucas guided the wagon down the familiar path, she held her breath. To her amazement, the cabin still stood, though smoke damage stained the exterior, and the garden was completely destroyed. But it was Emma's grave she rushed to first, her heart in her throat. The fence Lucas had built with such care remained intact, though scorched on one side where the fire had come dangerously close. The small cross within, however, was untouched, as if protected by some divine intervention, or perhaps by the loving barrier Lucas had constructed around it. "It's a miracle," Grace whispered, falling to her knees beside the gate. Lucas knelt beside her, his hand finding hers. "Not a miracle," he said quietly. "Just good, solid craftsmanship." But his voice held wonder too, and when Grace turned to him, she found his eyes suspiciously bright. In that moment, with relief flooding through her, Grace did what she'd been wanting to do for weeks. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. A brief, gentle kiss of gratitude and something more. When she pulled back, Lucas looked stunned. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I brought you trout for supper," he admitted. Grace laughed softly, surprising herself. "You've been patient. Some things are worth waiting for," he replied simply. The harvest dance arrived just as Grace finished cleaning the smoke damage from her cabin. Lucas appeared at her door promptly at 6, wearing a clean shirt and new suspenders, his usually unruly hair slicked back with water. He looked so different from his usual rugged self that Grace couldn't help but smile. "You clean up well, Mr. Larson," she teased, accepting the wildflowers he'd brought. "As do you, Mrs. Harper," he responded, his appreciative gaze taking in her freshly pressed dress and carefully arranged hair. The town hall had been transformed with autumn decorations, dried corn husks, pumpkins, and colorful leaves adorned every surface. The local band played lively tunes, and tables groaned under the weight of community-provided dishes. Grace felt the stares as they entered, heard the whispers behind raised hands. It was her first social event since Emma's death, and she was attending with a man not her husband. But Lucas's steady presence beside her gave her courage, and when he led her to the dance floor for a waltz, she followed without hesitation. "People are talking," she murmured as they moved in time to the music. "Let them," Lucas replied, his hand warm against her back. "They've got nothing better to do in this town." Grace laughed, drawing more curious glances. "You're a surprisingly good dancer for a ranch hand." "My mother insisted all her sons learn properly," he explained. "Said no child of hers would embarrass a lady on the dance floor." As the evening progressed, Grace relaxed, enjoying the simple pleasure of music, company, and Lucas's attentive presence. When they stepped outside for air, he guided her to a quiet spot behind the hall, away from prying eyes. "I have something to ask you," he said, suddenly serious. Grace's heart quickened. Yes. The ranch foreman has offered me a parcel of land 40 acres at the south end of Blackwater property. Good grazing land with a creek running through it. I've saved enough to build a proper house. That's wonderful news, Grace said sincerely, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Would this mean seeing less of him? Lucas took her hands in his. Thing is, I don't want to build that house alone. I don't want to live in it alone either. He took a deep breath. I know it hasn't been that long since you lost your family, and maybe this is too soon, but I've come to care for you more than I thought possible after losing Martha. Grace's breath caught as she realized where this was heading. I'm not asking to replace what you lost, Lucas continued earnestly. No one could, but I'm asking if you might consider starting something new. With me. Are you proposing Lucas Larson? Grace asked softly. Inelegantly, but yes, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. I love you, Grace Harper. I think I have since I saw you standing so brave and broken by your daughter's grave. I'd be honored if you'd consent to be my wife. Tears filled Grace's eyes, not of sorrow this time, but of a complex mixture of emotions: joy, fear, hope, and lingering grief. I care for you deeply, Lucas, but there's something you should know. She swallowed hard. I may not be able to have more children. The doctor in Denver said after Emma's difficult birth that another might be impossible. Lucas's expression didn't change. I'm asking for you, Grace. Just you. If children come, they'll be a blessing. If not, we'll still have each other. His sincerity was unmistakable, and Grace felt the last of her hesitation melt away. Then yes, she whispered, I will marry you, Lucas. His kiss was gentle but held the promise of deeper passion, and when they returned to the dance, Grace noticed her cheeks were flushed and her heart lighter than it had been in nearly a year. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Willits. Most responded with approval. Lucas was well respected, and many had worried about Grace's ability to survive alone. A few, like Widow Jenkins, expressed concern about the timing. Not even a year since Thomas passed, she remarked disapprovingly when Grace visited her shop for fabric. And the baby not cold in her grave. With all due respect, Mrs. Jenkins, Grace replied evenly. No one knows the measure of grief better than the one who bears it. Lucas has helped me carry mine when it seemed too heavy to bear alone. The older woman softened slightly. He is a good man. I'll grant you that. The best I've known, Grace agreed, selecting a length of blue cotton for curtains in their new home. The wedding took place in late October, a simple ceremony in the small Willits church with just a handful of guests, Lucas's ranch colleagues, the storekeeper and his wife who had been kind to Grace during her darkest days, and the young pastor who spoke of new beginnings and God's grace in times of sorrow and joy alike. Grace wore a dove-gray dress she had sewn herself, with a sprig of late-blooming wildflowers in her hair. Lucas, unrecognizable in his new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as they spoke their vows. I promise to honor your past while building our future, he added to the traditional words, his voice steady and sure, to remember those you've loved and lost, and to walk beside you through whatever comes. Grace's voice trembled as she repeated her own vows, adding, I promise to open my heart again, knowing that love doesn't diminish what came before but adds to life's measure. That evening, Lucas brought her not to the homestead where so many memories resided, but to a canvas tent he'd erected on their new property, furnished simply but comfortably with a proper bed, cooking stove, and trunk for their belongings. It's just temporary, he assured her, lighting the lanterns as dusk fell, until the house is built. But I thought we might want to start fresh. Grace moved into his arms, overcome with gratitude for his understanding. It's perfect. Their first night together as husband and wife was marked by tender discovery and gentle passion. Lucas was patient, letting Grace set the pace as she learned to trust and desire again. When they lay tangled together afterward, the canvas walls rustling in the night breeze, Grace felt a peace she hadn't thought possible months before. "I never thought I'd feel happiness again," she confessed, her head resting on Lucas's chest. His fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happiness has a way of finding us when we least expect it." The winter of 1878 proved harsh, but their temporary dwelling remained snug against the Colorado cold. During the day, Lucas worked on their house, a sturdy 2-room cabin with a proper stone fireplace, while Grace established their home, sewing curtains and quilts, learning to cook the game Lucas brought home, and adapting to life as a rancher's wife. On Christmas morning, Lucas presented her with a hand-carved jewelry box. "Open it," he urged, watching nervously as Grace lifted the lid. Inside lay a silver locket, simple but beautiful. When Grace opened it, she gasped. On one side was a tiny lock of blonde hair she recognized immediately as Emma's, preserved from a curl she'd kept in the family Bible. "How did you?" "I saw it when you were packing the night of the fire," Lucas explained. "I thought you might want a way to keep her close." Tears filled Grace's eyes as she fastened the locket around her neck. "Thank you," she whispered, too moved for more words. Lucas cleared his throat, clearly emotional himself. "There's room on the other side, for whatever the future brings." By spring, their house was complete, and Lucas brought Grace to Emma's grave one last time before they left the homestead behind for good. He had reinforced the fence, replacing the fire-damaged sections and adding a fresh coat of paint. "I'll bring you here whenever you wish," he promised as Grace placed fresh wildflowers by the small cross. "She'll always be part of us." Grace nodded, touching the locket at her throat. But it's time to look forward now. Their new life took shape gradually, marked by hard work and quiet contentment. Lucas proved as capable a husband as he was a builder, treating Grace with unwavering respect and growing affection. Their love deepened through shared challenges: a harsh winter, a difficult calving season, the everyday trials of carving out a life on the frontier. In the summer of 1879, just before their first anniversary, Grace experienced familiar symptoms she had not felt since before Emma was born. Afraid to hope, she waited until she was certain before sharing the news with Lucas. "Are you sure?" he asked, his expression a mixture of joy and concern as they sat at their kitchen table after supper. Grace nodded. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I went to town. He says I'm about 3 months along already." She hesitated. "He also warned there might be complications, given my history." Lucas knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." "But Grace," his voice broke slightly, "I won't lose you. If there's a choice to be made, let's pray it doesn't come to that," Grace interrupted gently. "The doctor says I'm stronger than I was before, and I believe this child is meant to be." The pregnancy progressed without the difficulties Grace had experienced with Emma. As her body changed, Lucas treated her with tender care, taking on more household duties and insisting she rest frequently. By winter, Grace's belly was prominently rounded, and they began preparing the small second room of their cabin as a nursery. "Boy or girl, what do you think?" Lucas asked one evening as he sanded the edges of a cradle he was building. Grace, seated nearby with mending in her lap, considered the question. "A boy, I think. Strong like his father." Lucas smiled. "As long as the child has your heart, I'll be content." In February of 1880, during a rare mild spell, Grace went into labor. Unlike her previous experience, this birth progressed quickly and without complications. Lucas paced outside their bedroom as the midwife from town attended Grace, his prayers a constant murmur until the distinctive cry of a newborn pierced the air. When the midwife finally allowed him inside, Lucas found Grace propped against the pillows, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Lucas approached almost reverently, accepting the swaddled infant with hands that trembled slightly. The baby had a shock of dark hair and, when he opened his eyes briefly, revealed the same deep blue as his father's. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, overcome. "I thought we might call him Thomas," Grace suggested cautiously. "After his grandfather, Thomas Lucas Larson." Lucas's eyes met hers, understanding the significance of her choice. "I'd be honored, and I think Thomas would be too." Grace touched the locket at her throat. "Emma would have adored being a big sister." "She is in a way," Lucas said gently. "She'll always be our firstborn." In the days that followed, as Grace recovered and they adjusted to life with their new son, Lucas disappeared for several hours one afternoon. When he returned, he refused to tell Grace where he'd been, only that he had a surprise that would have to wait until she was stronger. 2 weeks later, when Grace was able to ride in the wagon again, Lucas bundled her and the baby carefully and drove them to a familiar spot, the small hillside where Emma's grave lay. As they approached, Grace gasped. Beside the weathered fence Lucas had built nearly 2 years before stood a new white picket enclosure, surrounding a marble headstone that replaced the simple wooden cross. Emma Grace Harper, beloved daughter, September 4th, 1877, March 15th, 1878. Of such is the kingdom of heaven, Lucas. Grace breathed, tears streaming down her face. "It's beautiful. I wanted her to have something permanent," he explained, helping her down from the wagon, little Thomas secure in her arms. "Something that would stand the test of time and tell anyone who passes by that she was loved." Together, they stood before the grave, a family bound by love that transcended loss. Grace leaned against Lucas's strong shoulder, their son between them, feeling the circle of their lives continuing forward while honoring what had come before. "I think," Grace said softly, "we should bring him here sometimes, when he's older. Tell him about his sister." Lucas nodded, his arm tightening around her. "We will. And about Thomas too. All the love that came before will only make what we share now stronger." As the years passed, the Larson family prospered. Their ranch expanded as Lucas's hard work and fair dealings earned him a reputation throughout the county. Thomas grew into a strong, kind-hearted boy with his father's quiet determination and his mother's compassionate spirit. In 1882, Grace gave birth to twin girls they named Martha and Elizabeth. Martha for Lucas's first wife and Elizabeth for Grace's mother. The family of 5 filled their expanded home with laughter and love, creating new memories while honoring the past. Every year on Emma's birthday, they would visit her grave with fresh flowers. Lucas maintained both enclosures meticulously, the original fence he had built with his own hands now preserved as an inner boundary, with the white picket fence forming an outer protection around it. As the children grew old enough to understand, they were included in these pilgrimages, learning that family extended beyond those present to include those remembered. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Lucas took Grace to the hill at sunset, just the two of them while a neighbor watched the children. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked as they stood hand in hand before Emma's grave, now surrounded by wildflowers Grace had planted over the years. "Choosing to love again after such loss?" Grace turned to him, studying the face that had become more dear to her than she could have imagined possible on that day he first offered to build a fence. "How could I regret the greatest blessing of my life?" she replied. "You taught me that hearts, like fences, can be rebuilt stronger and more beautiful than before." Lucas drew her into his arms, still as tender with her as he had been in the beginning. "And you taught me that love isn't diminished by sharing it, only multiplied." As the sun set over the Colorado hills, casting long shadows from the fence Lucas had built with his own hands so many years before, Grace rested her head against his chest, grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought them together, a journey that began with grief, but had led to a life richer and fuller than either could have imagined. The cross that once stood small and bare was now embraced by love on all sides, the careful craftsmanship of a fence that had weathered storms and fire, the strength of a family bound together by choice as much as circumstance, and the enduring legacy of a love that had begun in the most unlikely of places, beside a tiny grave where a cowboy's compassion had sparked the first flicker of hope in a young widow's shattered heart.